Malcolm X was born on May 19, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. The fourth of Earl and Louise Little's 8 children, Malcolm Little, as he was then called, entered a world full of violence and fear. Only a few weeks before his birth, the dreaded Night Riders of the Ku Klux Klan, the most notorious white supremacist group in America, paid a visit to his family. The Klan's terrorist attack to intimidate anyone who was not white was the first in a series of grim incidents that devastated Malcolm's family during his early life. Malcolm's father, Earl, was a strong-willed Baptist minister who happened to be preaching in another community on the night when a band of white-robed horsemen appeared at his home. Waving torches and rifles, the Klan members surrounded the house and called for the Reverend Earl Little to step outside. They planned on lynching him in front of his family. Now, these attacks were part of the bloody drama staged throughout much of the South after the Civil War. Blacks had been granted citizenship and the right to vote in 1868 and 1870, but Southern whites were determined to deny them these privileges. Through racially discriminatory Jim Crow laws established by state legislatures, blacks were segregated. Malcolm's father took up preaching because it enabled him to speak out for black rights under the protection of the church. It was largely because of his position as a spokesman for the civil rights movement that Malcolm's father was targeted by the Klan. Shortly after their attack, the Littles joined many other black families who left their farms in the South and moved to industrial centers in the North. Malcolm's family stayed briefly in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Then they settled in Lansing, Michigan, where his father planned to run a store while continuing his preaching. The neighbors were appalled. They immediately claimed that the house had to be sold to whites. The Littles, however, refused to move. Not long thereafter, a white mob belonging to a group called the Black Legion surrounded the house. Malcolm later reported that one of his earliest memories was of this night. "Our home was burning down around us," he said. "My mother, with the baby in her arms, just made it into the yard before the house crashed in. I remember we were outside in the night, in our underwear, crying, screaming, yelling our heads off." Even despite this violence, Earl continued to preach black rights in secret meetings to those who would listen. Malcolm often accompanied his father to these gatherings of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, an organization that urged blacks to stop trying to blend into white society. Despite Little's attempts at secrecy, white racist groups learned of these meetings. While Malcolm was proud of his father for speaking out, he was also afraid for him. Malcolm's fears were realized in 1931 when several men came to the Little house to tell the family that his father was dead. Little had been found on the trolley tracks. He had been severely beaten and then laid across the tracks where a trolley had run over him. Little's death left the family in financial difficulty. They received no benefits from Little's life insurance policy after his death. And yet, the large family managed to survive. Louise Little joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which helped them with their meals. Malcolm and another brother contributed by hunting bullfrogs and rabbits. Now, while times were hard for the entire family, it was Louise Little who was impacted the most. Forced to assume the role of the head of the family, she seemed lost at times and completely overwhelmed. She spent hours crying over her inability to take care of her children. She began talking to herself and drifting away to a fantasy world. It became increasingly scary for the children to watch their mother's mental status deteriorate. Malcolm, little more than 10 years old, was terrified that he would be forced to leave his mother. To help compensate these feelings, Malcolm began hanging out with a wild group of youngsters who turned to small-time stealing. When Malcolm was 13, his mother was declared insane and was committed to a mental hospital where she stayed for the next 27 years. the little children were split up and sent to live with various families in the community. Now, after his mother was sent away, Malcolm was sent to a juvenile detention center in Mason, Michigan, before being sent on to reform school. A white couple, whose last name was Swerlin, ran the school and took an immediate liking to Malcolm and appreciated his eagerness to help. So Malcolm remained with the Swerlins until the spring of 1939.